We have a legend with us today on the podcast, Dan Kasowski. You're a man of many titles right now over the course of your time at UND Aerospace, but also right now. So I've always known you as the maintenance director, but there's also more to it, right?
Right. Yeah, there's several different titles I've been, had over the years, obviously. Right now, I think in the university system, they call me Director of Flight Support Services. But, from the FAA standpoint and aviation standpoint, I'm actually the Aircraft Director of Maintenance, under a repair station or 145 repair station and things like that. So, and the other titles more probably because of the other duties I have, like our flight line, our publications department, our bookstore, things like that, avionics, parts. So I kind of encompass all of that. But, the main title when you come to the FAA and the 145 repair station, it requires certain titles, and Director of Aircraft Maintenance happens to be one of them.
So we're talking to you today because you got a pretty big event coming up.
I do.
You're retiring.
I am.
After how long?
46 years and 7 months it'll be. So,
wow.
Yep, I'm 1 month away. My official date will be May 15th, so we're exactly 4 weeks away. So
unbelievable. Boy,
yeah.
That's quite an achievement. Let's start with your background. Where did you start? How did you get to where you're at?
Sure. Well, I grew up in North Dakota. I've always lived in North Dakota. I grew up in a little town called Buffalo, North Dakota. It's about 35 miles west of Fargo. Grew up on a farm. I have 3 brothers, 3 sisters. I'm the middle sibling, so I'm kind of stuck right in the middle. Grew up on a farm. My dad and his brothers. I had tons of cousins where I grew up. Great environment to grow up in. Small school system. We had 15 students in our high school, and then we combined my junior year with Tower City. So there actually was 30 in our graduating class. So small school. Back in the 70s when I graduated, farming was kind of tough, and I had 2 older brothers that got into the trade before I did, so there wasn't a lot of opportunity. I started looking around. I was very active in sports in high school and had a couple opportunities to play some football. Wasn't sure I wanted to do that, and it just so happened in a trip to Fargo with me, my dad and myself were down there for some other business, and he decided, let's swing over and talk to, I have an uncle called Uncle Dwayne. He was married to my dad's sister, and he's part owner in Dakota AeroTalk, which was an FBO/A&P school. And Uncle Dwayne ran the FBO, and Gordy Person ran the A&P school. Well, I just happened to go over there for a little tour, and they walked me through the school, and I kind of just got hooked on it somehow. I grew up with a mechanical background, obviously working on the farm and working on cars, things like that. So it kind of intrigued me, and thought about it not very long, a week or so, and decided, hey, maybe this is for me. I'm going to try it. So
how old are you then?
I was still in high school, so I was 18 years old, and quite honestly, I graduated in May out of high school, and I started there in June.
Oh, go ahead.
So I never even took that summer off. I basically went right into A&P school.
So did you go to A&P school in Fargo then?
I did, yes.
Under your uncle and...
Yeah, it was called Dakota AeroTalk. Yep.
Okay.
So my uncle was part owner in the business, which was kind of cool for me, having my uncle right there, and obviously when we got to some of our oral and practical stuff in the shop, sometimes I got a few favorite jobs, I think, out there.
Yeah.
And I actually was able to, work a little part-time for him and do things like that. So it was a great fit. So
how was the A&P schooling / licensing different back then versus now?
And unfortunately, with the FAA and the government, a lot of that hasn't changed over the years. So you're still, still required to have so many hours of training, classroom plus hands-on, practical. When you finish, you still write a written test. Then you have what they call an oral and practical, where you have to sit down with a designated FAA qualified examiner and actually do an oral test. And then you do a hands-on practical, where they may have you disassemble a magneto or measure out a cylinder or do some welding. Those can take anywhere from 2 to 3 days. So they can be kind of tough on you, or, if they know you, it's a little bit easier, but a lot of that hasn't changed. Some of the testing has gotten easier because of technology. Before it was a written test. It was a 3-part test, where the first part was a a multiple choice, and if you pass it, you got to move on to your written part. So you'd write it, and then they'd say, go have coffee and come back. Well, it's pretty nerve-wracking, and then you go back and you'd write the next part. So, and that, it's a process. So,
we get, obviously, lots of new maintenance people here every year, I'm guessing. And some are, I'm sure, fresh out of school. How much is learned hands-on at UND coming right out of the school? Because the school can't teach you everything. Just like here, we teach you how to fly a plane, but you get trained specific when you go to the airlines. Yeah. How does that work at UND Aerospace?
Correct. It's really similar. It's we call it a license to learn when we get it in A&P school. They'll tell you that. So when you do come out of school, and we're pretty fortunate here, it's something we determined early on, is it's hard for us to attract experienced mechanics, and in today's world especially, getting mechanics in general is very difficult because of the shortage. So we've set up a pretty robust training program. So when we bring new individuals into our program, we have a pretty strict training program for anybody coming in, because they are green, they're inexperienced, just like I was when I got out of A&P school. You need somebody to kind of mentor you through. And I think we do a very good job of that with our new employees. We have a pretty good program. Under the 145 repair station, we have a training manager, and that person oversees a lot of the training. Obviously a lot of it's still hands-on with the mechanics. The training manager can't do all of it, but, so they get a real good experience. And I really say that most of these kids right out of school, it takes a good year to get them up to where you're 100% comfortable with them, and then from that they expand, and some really grow fast, and some are just a little slower pace. So. But yes, you're right. They learn a lot. We spend a lot of time. We send people to factory schools like Robinson. We send somebody there every year to train on the Robinson helicopters. The King Airs, we'll send people off to King Air School, PT6 school. You name it in the past. We've had multiple kinds of factory schools. Plus, we try to bring vendors in. Lycoming, Continental, those kind of manufacturers too.
It's just like any trade, though. I mean, aviation, flying a plane, or electrical, or plumbing, or whatever the trade is. The more hands-on, the better off you're going to be. I mean, you can learn as much as you can in a classroom, but it only goes so far.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
That's why it's important to keep those. After you get them through those first few years, it hurts the program pretty bad when you lose somebody with 4 or 5 years of experience, because you've invested a lot into them, and they're quite productive for us too.
So you're retiring after 46 years, 7 months, you said?
Yeah.
Have you been here that entire time, or were you here more before that?
No, I was here. That's the entire time. I started October of '79, and I've been here ever since. There was a couple of us in the shop. I got hired by. I remember. Right out of A&P school, I got a job in Rugby, North Dakota for 1 year. I went to work for the owner called Dave Teets. I actually hired him in my later years to work for us at UND. Yeah, so it was kind of a full circle. But so I worked 1 year, and basically I did a lot of fabric work because that's what he did. But it was in Rugby, North Dakota, and I was 19 years old and wanted a little bit more activity of that. So I reached back to Dakota AeroTalk, and they suggested come up here and for an interview. So I did that, and I met with George Hammond. I remember it was in the trailer out at Flight Ops, because there was only the one building and the trailers sitting there. So I actually went in that trailer, and I had an appointment. George was, a half hour late, so I was pretty nervous. And I think George came in and asked me probably 3 questions. He says, "When can you start?" So it was a pretty easy interview. But I was pretty impressed because I never knew UND existed at that point. And of course, they weren't near as large. I don't think we had 30 airplanes then. So
yeah. So at that point, how long had Odegard, the school, been up? 10 years, 12 years?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. So and you started here, and how many planes did they have? Roughly?
I'm guessing roughly 30. Yeah.
30? Okay. Yeah. And then what was your position when you first came?
So I was just a mechanic, a floor mechanic with a year experience. Les Severance was a director of maintenance. He was a retired FAA person who just basically was there entitled. He didn't turn wrenches or anything. And then Frank Argenziano, who was kind of my boss. He was a shop manager. And there was a couple part-time people, and we kind of grew from there. It wasn't long after that we hired a couple more mechanics because growth was starting to happen at that time. So,
when did all the hangars start? What was the very first hangar? The barn?
So actually there was maintenance performed in the barn. That was the first building out there. Where the old dispatch is that they just tore down was the first maintenance hangar I worked in. and it's where the dispatch, basically where the whole dispatch area was, and the second floor. You know, the second floor wasn't there; it was a hangar, and we get 4 or 5 aircraft in there, and it had a roll-up door, a canvas door. It had radiant heat, and yeah, you know, it was plenty big for 3 or 4 of us back then. So,
and then what was the next addition in?
So then across the street to the east, they built what we called old maintenance. That was the next hangar to go up. A few years after that, they enclosed that gap between old maintenance and the dispatch. So that was open for a year or two. It was just, you know, that's why there's a hangar door at that end, and you know, you could go in either end of that hangar. But then they bridged it with that other hangar that is now gone and being rebuilt. So.
Boy, it's amazing. I mean, what you've seen from start to where you're at today just progressed all the way through. When did you start management then? Like, how long were you here?
So you know, you kind of progress in the maintenance organization. You know, and once we got, you know, eventually to 2 shifts. I was a shift supervisor on the day shift for many years. Then I went to the shop manager. And then when we started our QA department, I became the quality control manager for a while. And I held that for a while. And then overall, as we grew even larger, I become, you know, the shop manager for the overall operation. And that kind of made my transition into the director of maintenance that I moved into in '96. So I've been there about 30 years as a director of maintenance.
When did, over the time that you've been here, when would you say the most growth happened in maintenance? Like, roughly what years?
Ooh.
I mean, because it's been pretty steady.
It has been.
Has there been a boom at any point?
You know, I don't know. You know, there's always the ups and downs. You know, like, you know, I went through the flood. You know, we had that where we shut down, and that was challenging. You know, and a lot of people don't know that we used the barn and our avionics hangar for supplies. We worked with the Red Cross during the whole flood, where they brought supplies in, and those hangars were full of supplies, and we'd help load Red Cross every day, and they would distribute it around the city. So we stayed pretty active over the flood, you know, and moved some airplanes to Bismarck at that time, some of the contract flying, because we were shut down for a while. So you know, those kind of things, you know, stick out in your memory. And then, of course, 9/11 and COVID were big challenges over the year. But growth, you know, it's been pretty steady. You know, it seems like the last 10 to 15 years the hours keep increasing. I don't know, you know, so that gives me growth for manpower. The fleet, maybe not so much, but, you know, the hours, it seems like, you know, we're doing a lot more hours with the same amount of airplanes, but, you know, so it takes more staff. So, but yeah, growth has been one of the big challenges, obviously, over the years, and it takes a lot of pre-planning and, you know, fighting for positions, things like that. You know, and
when did UND Aerospace maintenance kind of set itself as kind of make its mark on the industry? When would that have been?
You know, I'm not sure. I think it was a slow transition. I think there's a lot of things we did over the years that made us better and stronger. You know, I was thinking that earlier on the way in. You know, one of the things, and it sounds silly, was, and it's made us very proficient, and it's transitioned to a lot of different things. It was a simple thing like we wrote a progressive inspection back when we started our QA, and we still use revisions of that today. But that created a window program in our inspection program that helped the scheduling tremendously. That's been one of the hugest things that has made us more efficient, because we have that 20-hour window in our inspection program. And it took us a long time to get that, because even though the turbine airplanes use these kind of progressive inspections, the recip industry or the smaller aircraft never did that. So getting that progressive inspection program took multiple rewrites and conversations with the FAA. And even then, getting them to buy off with our Windows program was a challenge. You know, today it's more of a norm, but back then it was something new to the aviation industry and the general aviation in general. So creating that checklist was huge, because we designed it so we could do these phases in one day. And then as we transitioned, and it created some other challenges that worked out really well. One was we still had problem with scheduling of airplanes where, you know, the dispatcher, they're going to fly the airplane until it's out of time. They're not going to give it to maintenance, because they're going to fly every hour they can. But somehow we had to convince them, we need these airplanes. If I've got people that aren't busy, I want these airplanes when they're in the window. That way we can keep our efficiency up. We keep my guys busy. So we kind of made a transition there where maintenance became the controller of the fleet. So basically, we control these airplanes from the time we get them till the time they leave. The only time we're not managing them is when they're flying, basically, or they're on a flight schedule. So we dictate tomorrow what airplanes I'm going to bring down, regardless of what the flight schedule is, because I need to keep a steady flow through the shop to keep my guys efficient, and I need to spread these airplanes out so they're available, and all of a sudden they're not bunched up and you have 30 airplanes down. So I think that transition with our production control being built in and the way we manage the fleet through the maintenance, and there's no other flight schools that do that. It's managed by their dispatch. So I think that's something that we've created uniquely that's really worked well for us. And I credit a lot of our success and our efficiency in the shop for that, you know. And then secondly, you know, we don't talk about our safety record a lot, but if you really look back at our maintenance history and incidents or accidents, there's really none. You knock on wood, we don't talk about it because maybe we're superstitious.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that I think our quality control, our 145 repair station, builds in that extra level of you know, safety and maintenance and everything we do, having two sets of eyes looking at everything. So that transition to the repair station, the transition to production control and those kind of things have just made us a lot more efficient on what we do too.
What is the diamond? We were talking about that off air. What is there's something diamond. What is that?
The Diamond Award?
Diamond Award, yes.
Okay, so that's, it kind of goes back to training in the A&P industry and you know, keeping your employees well trained and abreast of the new technology. So the FAA has a program. It's kind of like the Pilot Wings program.
Okay.
So every year they have a program where if you have so many hours of training, you get your bronze and your silver and your gold award, you know, as an individual based on the amount of training you do each year. Well, and then they come up, the FAA come up with a program for employees. If they get a certain percentage of their employees to have training throughout the year, they give these awards out. So every year in the last 30 years we've had 100% of our employees meet that criteria. Wow. So we're able to get the Diamond Award through the FAA. And that's a credit to everybody, the university, aerospace, everybody, because that workshops that we do in January is a pretty big deal for us. We bring in vendors and our own in-house training. It's a great opportunity. And people have to understand, we run 7 days a week, you know, 20 hours a day. So for us to train the whole crew is almost impossible unless we shut down and do that training. So being able to do that in January is very important. So
what is who's the longest employee that you've worked with over the course of 46 years? And you don't have to say their name, but just yearly wise.
Yeah, you know, there's several. You know, Kent Lovelace has been around here. You know, Kent, and you know, Don. I worked with Don a lot. You know, and Frank and Dane. I mean, the whole crew really, you know, has been part of, you know, growing up. Al Palmer, obviously. You know, I learned a lot from Al over the years. You know, and Dick Schultz, and you know, there's just been a lot of good people. I've worked with every dean. You know,
yeah.
So when you think about it, you know, I don't know if there's anybody that was a director of flight ops before George Hammond or not, but, you know, I've obviously worked with all of those. So, yeah, it's been, that part's been kind of fun. So,
what's your coolest, favorite, maybe not even favorite, but one story that sticks out in your head that you're going to go, I'll never forget that all my years of working maintenance?
Well, there's a lot of them. Yeah, some I can't tell, sorry. You know, and you know, it's kind of funny. In the early days, it was way different. You know, we got by with a lot of, you know, shenanigans and horseplay in the early days because things weren't as critical. And quite honestly, if you look back, we had way more incidents and problems back then too. So it's a good thing that we're way more structured. But there's been a lot of things. You know, one in particular with me was, I don't know if you ever heard the story of the 300 incident. We had the Hughes 300s. And for many years, you know, I went to 300 school with a lot of us, and we'd done some work on one day, and we always ran them up by ourselves. You know, it was just, I don't know, nobody said anything. We just would learn how to run them up, and, you know, I think even times we'd move them around a little bit, just playing with them, you know, that kind of thing. But anyway, it was a Friday. I remember a Friday evening in the fall, and this airplane had an oil leak, and Bill Little, one of our employees, was with me, and it was kind of cold, so we were out by back where maintenance used to be, the old maintenance. So we're out behind the hangar, and we're running it up. at the controls, and Bill was in there, and it was just getting dark. I remember that, and Bill gonna get out and check the oil leak, so he gets out and he steps off the skid, and the helicopter started to move on me. So Bill took off running smartly, but anyway, that helicopter started to spin on me, and
no.
The first spin was okay, but after the second one, it was enough force, it pinned me against the windshield because I didn't have my seatbelt on. So I did 13 circles in a Hughes 300, and I ended up out in the middle of Bravo ramp. And of course, several people saw that, and one guy, his comment was, all I saw was a nav light go by 13 times, he said. And we know it was 13 because I left scrapes on the concrete from the skids all the way out there. But, so that was kind of scary. You know, we laugh about it now, but you know, the things that go through your mind. I knew I was going to wreck the helicopter.
Yeah.
It's just, am I going to live? You know, that actually went through my mind, and I didn't wreck it. And you know, I was pretty fortunate. But you know, that's one of those, you know, learn from your experiences. This is stupid. And ever since then, we use a pilot, and we've gotten smarter over time. So
we all have those.
Yes,
look back. Go, I maybe shouldn't have done that. That was not a good choice, and you learn from it. You're exactly right. North Dakota Hall of Fame, Aviation Hall of Fame. Yeah. What was that, 2 years ago?
Yeah, it was 24.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for for maintenance, then is that what you were inducted as?
Yeah. Well, Hall of Fame doesn't really specify. It's just, you know, people have contributed to aviation within the North Dakota community. A very big honor for me. You know, I was pretty proud of that one. Didn't see it coming. Never expected that. So yeah, that was a pretty big honor, and it's, you know, it's people that have been involved in aviation, and over the years I've been involved in, you know, I was actually, we used to have the North Dakota Aviation Conference, and I actually chaired the committee for several years, and I was on it for 7 or 8 years, just to be part of the North Dakota community. And from a maintenance standpoint, that's important because we rely on our FBOs out there that help us out when we have an airplane broke here. So you got to stay linked with these people and have those relationships. And so being involved in that was important back in the day, and you know, and it paid dividends. So you get to know everybody within the state, a lot of the, you know, the operators. So yeah, getting that award was pretty nice for me, I should say.
Have you had any interest in actually going to the other side, the flying side of things?
You know, I have my private pilot.
You do?
Yeah, I got my private pilot early on, and I haven't stayed current. And yeah, I enjoy flying. I kind of wish I would have stayed current. Now that I'm retiring, you know, it would have been, I think, a good thing to get back in it. Maybe I will someday too. But
what are you going to do in retirement? Have you even thought about it
yet? Yeah,
you
know, we have some plans. You know, it's like probably like everybody else. You know, we have a lake place, so you know, this summer I'm retiring in May. You know, some timing there will work out. So I have the summer down there. Winter, you know, I think we'll get south somewhere. We haven't really decided where or what, you know, for a few months, and just try out some areas for a few years. And
go see Dick down in Arizona.
I will, yeah.
Dan Kasowski, congratulations on your retirement, and I appreciate you coming in and talking to us today.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. It's been a great time here at UND. I sold somebody today. I think the hardest thing I did was go in and tell Jeremy that I'm going to put my notice in. So it was a tough day. So,
I bet.